the forbidden ancient text that reveals the truth about human history. The chamber had remained sealed for nearly 2,000 years. Buried beneath layers of collapsed stone and blackened ash, hidden under the ruins of a forgotten settlement near the edge of the Egyptian desert, it was never supposed to be opened again. The entrance itself had no markings, no royal insignia, no indication that anything important rested below. To the outside world, it looked like nothing more than another grave swallowed by time. But when archaeologists finally broke through the final stone barrier in 1947, they discovered something that instantly changed the atmosphere inside the excavation. Not gold, not statues, not weapons, manuscripts, dozens of them. Sealed inside clay jars covered in strange symbols no scholar present could immediately identify. Some of the texts were burned at the edges, as if someone had tried to destroy them before hiding them away forever. Others were wrapped carefully in ancient linen, preserved with terrifying precision, almost as if the people who concealed them knew humanity would one day come searching for answers. And then came the warning. Written on the inside of one fractured cover was a sentence so disturbing that one of the translators reportedly refused to continue working on the manuscript after reading the opening pages. It said, "If the truth inside these pages is revealed, the foundations of history will collapse." At first, many dismissed the discovery as mythological nonsense, religious fiction, symbolic storytelling. But the deeper researchers went into the texts, the stranger everything became. The manuscript described civilizations that officially never existed. It spoke of catastrophic floods long before recorded history. It referenced stars, planetary alignments, and mathematical knowledge that should have been impossible for ancient cultures to understand. Even more unsettling, fragments of the same story began appearing in completely different parts of the world. Ancient Sumer, Mesoamerica, India, Egypt, civilizations separated by oceans, all preserving echoes of the same impossible memory. How? How could societies that never communicated describe nearly identical events, symbols, and beings? That question is where the real mystery begins, because this was no ordinary ancient text. According to some historians, it was part of a collection deliberately removed from historical records centuries ago, a text considered too dangerous to preserve publicly, too disruptive to religious authority, too threatening to political power, too destabilizing to humanity's understanding of its own origins. And perhaps the strangest part of all is this. The more modern scholars attempted to discredit the manuscript, the more hidden connections started emerging around it. Lost libraries, destroyed archives, vanished translators, missing pages, entire references erased from official records. It was as if history itself was trying to bury something. But what exactly? A forgotten civilization? A global catastrophe? Knowledge humanity was never meant to inherit? Or something far more disturbing? Tonight, we descend into one of the most controversial mysteries ever connected to the ancient world. A forbidden text surrounded by fear, censorship, and whispers of truths powerful enough to rewrite everything we believe about human history. And before this journey ends, you may begin to question whether the story of humanity has ever truly been told in full. The text that should not exist. The first scholars who examined the manuscript immediately understood that something about it was deeply wrong. The symbols did not belong entirely to one civilization. Certain passages resembled ancient Egyptian writing, while others mirrored structures found in forgotten Mesopotamian records. Some sections contained astronomical references that should not have existed during the era the text was supposedly written. Even the material itself created controversy. Parts of the manuscript appeared far older than historians initially believed, as if fragments of the text had been copied and preserved across multiple lost generations. But the most disturbing detail was not its age, it was its tone. The manuscript did not read like mythology or symbolic religion. It read like testimony from a world that history no longer remembered. As translations slowly emerged behind closed doors, fear began spreading among researchers connected to the project. The text described civilizations that officially never existed, societies possessing advanced knowledge long before the rise of Egypt or Sumer. Entire passages spoke of ancient rulers, catastrophic floods, and hidden teachings preserved after a global collapse that nearly erased humanity from existence. One researcher reportedly described the manuscript as a document capable of breaking the timeline of human history. Soon after, translation efforts were suddenly halted. Access to certain fragments became restricted. Papers referencing the manuscript quietly disappeared from academic circulation. Official explanations blamed uncertainty and lack of evidence. Unofficially, rumors claimed the text was considered too dangerous to release publicly. What made the manuscript truly terrifying was the realization that parts of its story already existed across the ancient world. Fragments of nearly identical narratives appeared in Mesopotamian flood legends, pre-dynastic Egyptian traditions, South American oral histories, and ancient Indian accounts, separated by thousands of miles and centuries of isolation. Civilizations that supposedly never communicated with one another all preserved echoes of the same impossible memory. A forgotten world destroyed by catastrophe, survivors carrying forbidden knowledge, and mysterious figures arriving afterward to guide the rebuilding of civilization. Historians called it coincidence. The manuscript insisted it was evidence. Then came the references to the destruction itself. The text repeatedly described fire descending from the heavens, oceans swallowing entire kingdoms, and cities vanishing beneath darkness and ash. Some passages suggested the collapse was not entirely natural. Others hinted that survivors intentionally concealed dangerous knowledge afterward, fearing humanity would repeat the same mistakes that destroyed the first civilization. That idea transformed the manuscript from a historical anomaly into something far more unsettling. It no longer sounded like a forgotten legend. It sounded like a warning sent across time. And hidden within the missing sections of the manuscript was supposedly the most controversial revelation of all: the identity of the beings who preserved humanity after the fall of the ancient world. Were they kings, priests, survivors, or something far more difficult to explain? The surviving fragments never answer directly, but they leave behind one terrifying implication. Humanity may not be living at the beginning of civilization. We may be living in the aftermath of one that was deliberately erased, the civilization that history erased. According to the forbidden manuscript, the first great human civilization did not rise beside the Nile, the Tigris, or the Euphrates. It existed long before recorded history began, in an age so distant that almost every trace of it was consumed by catastrophe. The text describes enormous cities built with impossible precision, monuments aligned perfectly with celestial movements, and societies possessing knowledge that should not have existed in the ancient world. But what makes the story terrifying is not the civilization itself. It is the claim that humanity once reached extraordinary heights and then vanished almost completely. The manuscript speaks about a world before the flood, a phrase repeated across countless ancient cultures separated by oceans and centuries. In Mesopotamian legends, there are stories of kings ruling for impossibly long periods before a great destruction arrived. Ancient Indian traditions describe lost ages ending in fire and chaos. Indigenous civilizations in the Americas preserve oral histories about previous worlds destroyed by water and darkness. Even ancient Egyptian records contain references to a sacred time ruled by mysterious figures before the dynasties officially recognized by history. Why do so many civilizations remember fragments of the same event? Why do they all describe humanity beginning again after a catastrophic collapse? The deeper researchers investigated these similarities, the stranger the evidence became. Massive stone structures appeared in different parts of the world with astonishing architectural precision, despite being created by cultures that supposedly lacked advanced tools. Ancient sites aligned with stars and planetary movements in ways modern science still struggles to explain. Some ruins seemed older than the civilizations credited with building them. It was as though humanity had inherited fragments of knowledge from a forgotten source without fully understanding where that knowledge originated. The manuscript claims the destruction happened quickly. Oceans rose violently. The sky burned for days. Entire coastlines disappeared beneath waves and mud. Survivors fled into mountains, caves, and isolated regions while the old world collapsed around them. But the text also suggests something even more disturbing. Certain groups allegedly preserved fragments of ancient knowledge in secret, passing it from generation to generation, while the rest of humanity rebuilt civilization from the ruins of memory. Over time, those fragments transformed into myths, religions, sacred symbols, and legends mistaken for fantasy. That possibility changes the way history itself is viewed. What if ancient myths are not inventions created by primitive societies? What if they are distorted memories of a real forgotten age humanity was never meant to rediscover? Because if the manuscript is even partially true, then the greatest mystery is no longer how civilization began. The real mystery is who decided the first civilization needed to be erased from history entirely. The beings who taught humanity. The most controversial part of the forbidden manuscript does not describe lost cities or ancient catastrophes. It describes the figures who appeared after the collapse. According to the text, when the old world was destroyed and the survivors wandered through a broken landscape of flooded ruins and burning skies, mysterious beings emerged to guide humanity through the chaos. The manuscript never clearly identifies them. That ambiguity is what makes the story so disturbing. Some passages describe them as wise rulers. Others portray them as teachers sent from beyond the known world. A few fragments refer to them almost like divine entities descending from the heavens carrying forbidden knowledge. The manuscript claims these figures taught humanity skills that transformed scattered survivors into functioning civilizations again. They allegedly introduced astronomy, sacred mathematics, agriculture, architecture, writing systems, and laws governing society itself. In one section, the text describes humans learning to measure the movement of stars long before organized kingdoms officially existed. Another fragment references enormous stone structures aligned with celestial bodies as if ancient builders possessed knowledge modern historians struggle to explain. The manuscript insists this knowledge was inherited, not discovered independently. What makes the mystery even stranger is how similar stories appear across the ancient world. In Mesopotamia, legends speak of divine sages emerging from the sea to teach civilization after a time of chaos. Ancient Egyptian traditions describe godlike rulers governing humanity before the dynasties of kings began. In Central America, stories tell of mysterious visitors bringing wisdom, calendars, and advanced knowledge before disappearing again. Across different continents, isolated cultures preserved nearly identical memories of enlightened figures arriving after a catastrophic age. Were these simply myths created to explain the origins of civilization? Or were ancient societies preserving distorted memories of real events? The manuscript never answers directly, but it repeatedly warns about the danger connected to this knowledge. Certain teachings were allegedly considered too powerful for humanity to possess without restraint. Some fragments suggest the previous civilization collapsed because knowledge advanced faster than wisdom. Others imply the beings who guided humanity understood that history moved in cycles and that civilizations repeatedly rise, grow arrogant, and destroy themselves. That idea transforms the manuscript from a historical curiosity into something much darker. It suggests humanity may not be progressing forward at all. We may be repeating the same pattern over and over again. And hidden inside several damaged sections is a question that still haunts researchers who studied the text. If these beings truly existed, where did they come from? Were they survivors of the forgotten civilization? Priests preserving ancient science? Powerful rulers later transformed into gods through legend? Or does the manuscript describe something far more difficult to explain? Because the deeper the text goes, the more it implies that humanity's earliest teachers may not have been entirely human at all. The global memory of a catastrophe. The forbidden manuscript describes the destruction of the ancient world with terrifying detail. It speaks of oceans rising without warning, mountains trembling violently, and fire descending from the sky as entire cities disappeared beneath ash and black water. According to the text, the catastrophe unfolded so quickly that millions never had time to escape. Kingdoms collapsed in a matter of days. Coastal civilizations vanished beneath enormous waves. The sky remained dark for weeks, and survivors wandered through a world that no longer resembled the one they once knew. But the most disturbing part is this: almost every ancient civilization on Earth preserved a memory of the same disaster. In Mesopotamia, flood legends describe humanity being nearly wiped out by divine judgment. Ancient Indian traditions speak of previous worlds destroyed in cycles of fire and chaos. Indigenous tribes across the Americas preserve stories about great floods, burning skies, and the collapse of an earlier age. Even ancient Chinese records describe a time when the heavens themselves seemed to break apart, unleashing destruction upon the earth. Historians often treat these stories as symbolic mythology created independently by isolated cultures. But the manuscript insists these legends are fragmented memories of a real global catastrophe witnessed by humanity's distant ancestors. As researchers compared these ancient accounts, strange similarities began emerging everywhere. Different cultures described giant waves swallowing civilizations, survivors escaping into mountains, and sacred knowledge being preserved after the disaster ended. Many traditions also mention mysterious figures guiding humanity through the aftermath, teaching survivors how to rebuild society from ruins. The details changed from culture to culture, but the core memory remained almost identical. Something enormous happened in humanity's forgotten past, and traces of that event survived inside myths carried across thousands of years. The manuscript also suggests the catastrophe may not have been entirely natural. Some passages describe the wrath of the heavens, as though the destruction was connected to forces humanity did not fully understand. Other fragments hint that the previous civilization had become dangerously advanced before its collapse. One damaged section appears to warn that humanity's pursuit of forbidden knowledge contributed directly to its destruction. That possibility introduces a chilling question. What if ancient civilizations were not destroyed simply by nature, but by the consequences of their own actions? That idea changes the meaning of every ancient ruin scattered across the planet. Buried cities beneath oceans, massive stone structures abandoned without explanation, civilizations appearing suddenly in history with advanced knowledge already fully developed. The manuscript suggests these are not isolated mysteries. They are surviving scars from a forgotten world erased by catastrophe. And if humanity once collapsed before, the text warns that history may not be finished repeating itself. The secret war over human history. The deeper historians traveled into the mystery surrounding the forbidden manuscript, the more they encountered evidence that someone had spent centuries trying to erase it. Entire sections of the text had vanished without explanation. Early translations disappeared from archives. References connected to the manuscript were quietly removed from academic records, and several historians who attempted to study the text publicly suddenly abandoned their research altogether. Officially, the manuscript was considered unreliable and historically questionable. Yet the intensity of the effort to suppress it raised an unsettling question. If the text was meaningless fiction, why was so much energy spent trying to bury it? The manuscript itself contains repeated warnings about the control of historical knowledge. It describes powerful institutions rewriting humanity's past after the ancient catastrophe, shaping collective memory in order to stabilize emerging civilizations. According to the text, fragments of the old world were deliberately hidden because the truth about humanity's origins was considered too dangerous for future societies to know. Certain passages even suggest that surviving leaders feared chaos would erupt if people discovered civilization had already collapsed once before. History, according to the manuscript, became a weapon used to control perception itself. This idea is not entirely disconnected from reality. Throughout history, conquering empires routinely destroyed texts, erased rival cultures, and rewrote historical narratives to strengthen their own authority. The burning of libraries, censorship of religious writings, and destruction of forbidden records happened repeatedly across the ancient world. Entire civilizations vanished not only through war and disaster, but through deliberate removal from memory. The manuscript presents itself as one of the few surviving fragments that escaped this historical purge. What makes the story especially disturbing is the possibility that traces of the hidden past still exist scattered across the modern world. Unexplained ruins buried beneath deserts and oceans, ancient structures built with impossible precision, symbols repeating across civilizations that officially never interacted. The manuscript claims these are remnants of a forgotten chapter humanity was taught to ignore. It suggests history is not incomplete by accident, but by design. The official timeline humanity accepts today may represent only the surviving version approved by those who controlled knowledge after the collapse. And buried inside the final surviving sections is a terrifying implication. The war over human history never truly ended. According to the manuscript, every generation inherits only fragments of the truth, while the rest remains hidden behind destroyed archives, forbidden texts, and carefully constructed narratives. If that claim is true, then the greatest mystery is no longer whether the manuscript is authentic. The real mystery is how much of humanity's past has already been erased forever, the code hidden inside the text. At first, researchers believed the forbidden manuscript was simply a collection of ancient historical accounts. But the deeper scholars examined the text, the more they realized something unusual had been hidden beneath the surface of the writing itself. Certain symbols repeated in strange mathematical intervals. Specific numbers appeared connected to astronomical cycles. Entire passages seemed structured according to patterns that made no sense linguistically, yet aligned perfectly with celestial movements recorded thousands of years later. It was as though the manuscript contained a second layer of information concealed inside the text, like a code waiting to be discovered. One of the most disturbing discoveries involved the stars. The manuscript repeatedly referenced precise planetary alignments tied to major turning points in human history. Some sections described cycles of destruction occurring at vast intervals connected to celestial movements beyond the understanding of ancient civilizations. Researchers were stunned to find that several alignments mentioned in the text matched real astronomical events calculated using modern technology. How could a civilization thousands of years old possess such advanced knowledge of the heavens? That question transformed the manuscript from a controversial artifact into something far more difficult to explain. The numerical patterns became even stranger. Certain sequences repeated throughout the text in ways resembling encoded warnings. Dates connected to floods, collapses, and societal upheaval appeared arranged according to mathematical relationships that seemed intentional rather than random. Some scholars believed the manuscript was preserving a timeline of recurring catastrophes, suggesting that civilizations rise and fall according to cycles humanity has never fully understood. Others argued the patterns were coincidence created by desperate researchers searching for meaning where none existed. But even skeptics struggled to explain why the symbols and sequences appeared with such precision across unrelated sections of the manuscript. Then came the symbols themselves. Strange markings buried inside the text matched carvings discovered in distant parts of the world separated by oceans and centuries. Similar geometric figures appeared in ancient temples, underground ruins, and forgotten ceremonial sites connected to civilizations with no known contact. The manuscript implied these symbols were more than decoration. They represented fragments of a shared language inherited from the lost world that existed before the catastrophe. A language designed not only to record history, but to preserve warnings for future generations. That possibility changes everything. Because if the manuscript truly contains encoded knowledge passed down from a forgotten civilization, then humanity may have misunderstood ancient texts for thousands of years. What modern society dismisses as mythology or symbolism may actually be fragments of scientific, astronomical, and historical information disguised to survive the collapse of civilizations. And according to the manuscript, the most dangerous part of the code has still not been fully deciphered. Hidden somewhere inside the surviving fragments is allegedly a final message connected not to humanity's past, but to its future. The part too dangerous to translate. Among all the surviving fragments of the forbidden manuscript, one section terrified researchers more than any other. Unlike the earlier passages discussing lost civilizations, celestial cycles, and ancient catastrophes, this final portion was sealed separately from the rest of the text. Several pages had been intentionally damaged, as though someone long ago tried to prevent future generations from reading what was written there. According to rumors surrounding the original translation project, certain historians refused to continue studying the manuscript after reaching these passages. One researcher allegedly described the experience as reading a warning meant for the end of human civilization. The surviving fragments suggest the manuscript was never intended merely to explain the past. It was designed to prepare humanity for something still to come. The text describes civilization moving through repeating cycles of growth, arrogance, collapse, and rebirth. Each cycle begins with knowledge, reaches extraordinary heights of power, and eventually destroys itself through corruption and imbalance. The manuscript repeatedly warns that humanity forgets the lessons of previous ages, believing itself more advanced than the civilizations that came before. But according to the text, every civilization eventually reaches the same dangerous threshold. Then the manuscript becomes even more disturbing. One damaged section appears to describe humanity entering a period when information spreads faster than wisdom, when societies become divided by illusion, and when people lose the ability to distinguish truth from manipulation. Another fragment references voices controlling the minds of nations and a world overwhelmed by distraction while approaching catastrophe. Modern readers have interpreted these passages in countless ways, but the similarities to contemporary society are difficult to ignore. That is precisely why many researchers considered the text so dangerous. It did not feel ancient anymore. It felt personal. The manuscript also hints that humanity's greatest threat does not come from the sky, the oceans, or natural disaster. It comes from human nature itself. Pride, greed, obsession with power. The text warns that civilizations repeatedly destroy themselves because technological advancement outpaces moral wisdom. Ancient societies allegedly possessed knowledge capable of transforming the world, yet collapsed because they lost control over the forces they unleashed. According to the manuscript, the destruction of the first civilization was not simply a tragedy, it was a consequence. And buried within the final surviving lines is the most chilling implication of all. The manuscript suggests humanity is approaching the same turning point once again. The signs described in the ancient text allegedly appear before every great collapse in history: division, arrogance, obsession with power, manipulation of truth, and the belief that civilization has become invincible. Whether the manuscript is prophecy, historical memory, or coincidence remains unknown. But one terrifying possibility continues haunting everyone who studies it. Perhaps the real reason this text was hidden was not because it revealed the past, but because it warned humanity about the future. What if the text is right? By the time researchers reached the final sections of the forbidden manuscript, the investigation had become something far larger than the study of an ancient text. It was no longer simply about archaeology, mythology, or forgotten civilizations. The real question had become far more unsettling. What if the manuscript is telling the truth? What if humanity's history is not a straight line of progress, but the shattered remains of previous worlds that rose, collapsed, and disappeared long before recorded civilization began? Suddenly, mysteries once dismissed as coincidence begin connecting in disturbing ways. Ancient flood stories repeated across continents. Massive structures built with impossible precision. Civilizations appearing suddenly in history with advanced astronomical knowledge already fully developed. Strange symbols shared by cultures separated by oceans. Entire chapters of humanity's past missing from official timelines. Individually, these mysteries seem disconnected, but the manuscript presents them as fragments of the same hidden story, pieces of a forgotten memory humanity has carried unconsciously for thousands of years. The most disturbing implication is not that ancient civilizations may have existed before recorded history. It is the possibility that humanity repeatedly destroys itself. According to the manuscript, civilizations always believe they are the pinnacle of progress just before collapse arrives. They become obsessed with power, lose connection to wisdom, manipulate truth, and mistake technological advancement for invincibility. Then comes the catastrophe, not always from nature alone, but from the consequences of human ambition spiraling beyond control. That pattern feels terrifyingly familiar in the modern world. Even skeptics admit there is something strange about humanity's collective memory. Why do isolated cultures preserve nearly identical stories about destruction and rebirth? Why do myths from opposite sides of the world describe floods, fire from the heavens, sacred knowledge, and survivors rebuilding civilization afterward? The manuscript claims these stories endure because they are echoes of real events buried beneath layers of time, distortion, and deliberate suppression. Humanity remembers more than it realizes. The memory simply survives in fragmented form. And perhaps that is why the manuscript was considered so dangerous. Because if humanity discovers that civilizations existed and collapsed before recorded history, then the modern world is forced to confront a terrifying possibility. Progress does not guarantee survival. The ancient world may not have disappeared because it was primitive. It may have disappeared because it became too powerful without understanding the consequences of its own knowledge. That warning transforms the manuscript into something deeply personal for every generation alive today. The greatest mystery, then, is not whether every detail in the text is historically accurate. The true mystery is why humanity continues preserving the same warnings across thousands of years, cultures, and civilizations. Perhaps the forbidden manuscript survived because someone wanted future generations to remember what happens when societies believe they are untouchable. And perhaps the most frightening part of all is this. If the cycles described in the text are real, humanity may already be approaching the next collapse without even realizing it. The truth, buried under history. The deeper humanity searches into the shadows of the ancient world, the more history begins to feel incomplete, not simply forgotten, but fractured, as though entire chapters of civilization were deliberately buried beneath myths, destroyed archives, and collapsing ruins scattered across the planet. The forbidden manuscript stands at the center of that mystery like a surviving fragment from a world that was never supposed to be remembered. A world that may have existed long before the first officially recognized civilizations ever appeared in history books. Whether the manuscript is entirely authentic may never be fully proven. Too many pages are missing, too many records vanished, too many questions remain unanswered. But what makes the text impossible to ignore is how often reality seems to echo its warnings. Ancient flood legends appear across continents. Forgotten ruins continue emerging from deserts, jungles, and ocean floors. Civilizations still rise believing they are invincible, only to collapse beneath the weight of power, arrogance, and internal decay. The manuscript does not merely describe the past. It describes a pattern humanity may still be trapped inside. Perhaps that is the real reason the text became feared. Not because it challenges archaeology or religion, but because it forces humanity to confront its own fragility. Modern civilization believes itself more advanced than every society that came before it. Yet every empire in history once believed the same thing just before disappearing. The manuscript suggests that knowledge alone has never been enough to save humanity. Without wisdom, civilizations become architects of their own destruction. That message feels less like ancient mythology and more like a warning aimed directly at the modern world. And maybe the most unsettling possibility is this: humanity may already possess fragments of the lost world without realizing it. Hidden inside myths, symbols, sacred traditions, and unexplained structures preserved across the earth may be traces of civilizations erased by time and catastrophe. The forbidden manuscript implies that history is not a clean timeline moving endlessly forward. It is a cycle of memory and forgetting, collapse and rebirth, knowledge gained and knowledge lost again. So the question remains, what if humanity is not the first great civilization to stand at the edge of collapse? What if the ancient world already experienced everything modern society believes is unique? And what if the greatest secret hidden inside the forbidden text was never about the past at all, but about the future waiting ahead for humanity if the warnings are ignored once again? The manuscript never gives a final answer. It leaves only a choice: to dismiss the ancient voices as myth and coincidence, or to wonder whether history has been trying to warn humanity for thousands of years.